Today we get into Father Abraham, known as Abram here for quite some time in Genesis. Now, I skipped the genealogy at the end of what I think is Genesis 11. You might want to look at the very end where it tells you where Abram and his wife Sarai come from and how they start to journey into the land of the Chaldeans. They begin to journey, they journey from Ur of the Chaldeans into the land of Canaan, but they stop before they get there. That's important, and I should have included that. Note as well that Abram, later known as Abraham, is indeed the father of many nations, which is what God promises him from the beginning of this story. He is considered the progenitor, or really the father of our relationship to God. The Jews consider Abraham their father in the faith. The Christians consider Abraham our father in the faith, and the Muslims consider Abraham their father in the faith. He is, in fact, the father of many nations, as God promised him he would be. Up until now, we have all these stories of sort of, they have a mythical form to them, and they're hard to understand, and they seem weird, and they seem almost like fairy stories. But now we get into history. From this point on in Genesis, we still have stories that have elements that are astonishing, but we really begin the history of the Jewish people and the Christian people and the Islamic people. Abraham lived about 2,000 years before Christ. We live about 2,000 years after. He came as long before Christ as we have come after Christ. Now, I thought I was going to talk about Romans today because it's so difficult, but we're going to look at Romans a little later. We're going to go back and pick up what Paul says about Abraham when we look further into Abraham's story. But I thought today that I would take a look at the Beatitudes, which is where we are. The Beatitudes are incredible. They're exactly the opposite of what you would expect a preacher to preach. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I'm not sure what Jesus means by the poor in spirit, unless he means those who are humble in their faith and not proud of it. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Notice how these are the opposite of what you would expect. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Well, if you're mourning because someone you love has died. C.S. Lewis talks about how if you love anything, you're at risk. Even an animal. The only way to avoid the pain from the loss of love is to make your heart into a heart of stone that is impenetrable. If it's a heart of flesh or a circumcised heart, as the New Testament tells us we must have, you're going to be hurt. And yet Jesus says, blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. That there is somehow a mysterious connection between the pain you feel when you suffer loss of someone you love and the comfort that you will eventually receive. You know, we could do a whole class just on the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Jordan Peterson talks about that. Meek might be a bad translation. It's probably better, blessed are those who are not pushy or who do not assert themselves. At any rate, let's look at the others. This is my favorite. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, I'm hoping that applies to me. I get so angry at the Catholic Church because I love the church so deeply. And since becoming Catholic almost 20 years ago, I found the mess that we're in and how nobody really seems to care. Some people do. The people that do tend to become a little crazy. And I hope that's not happening to me, although clearly it is. But if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you will be satisfied. Righteousness being holiness, being right, being true, being good. This is totally the opposite of Buddhism. When you go out into the world, my students, you will hear people say, oh, you're Catholic? Well, I'm a Buddhist. By which they mean, I've heard a rumor that Buddhism means you don't worry about anything. And I don't want to worry about anything, so I'm a Buddhist. That's not what Buddhism is. Buddhism is the hope that we will achieve obliteration, that ourselves will cease to exist because desire in and of itself is wrong in Buddhism and only traps you into the illusion of Maya, the illusion of the world around you. Christianity is exactly the opposite. God fulfills our heart's desires, as we are told in Psalm 35. And here, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, if you get angry when things are unjust, That is a good thing. That is not wrong. Being holy and being Christian does not mean suffocating all of our desires. It means getting them in the right order, certainly, because we know how easy anger or lust or gluttony, how easy it is for our desires to turn into sins. We know that. Everybody knows that. But that's not because desire is wrong. It's because we're messed up. If you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you will be satisfied. I hold out much hope for that. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. That's why you have to become like a little child to enter the kingdom. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. We'll see some of that if we ever really get into the prophets in this course. These are exactly the opposite of what you would think they would be. You would think Jesus would say, blessed are you if you're nice. Blessed are you if you mind your manners. Blessed are you if you just sit there with a smile on your face and don't feel anything. I had a friend who was deeply Catholic, very religious, and she was dating a guy. And I asked her how it was going, and he had stopped responding to her. And she said, oh, well, it's just God's will. And I said, it's not God's will. Don't you love this guy? Reach out to him, rattle his cage. Why do we think that quietism is what makes for holy Christians? Quietism is a heresy, the belief that all you're supposed to do is sit there and smile, and God takes care of everything else, and smile a stupid smile that doesn't offend anybody. Jesus says the opposite. Mourn when your loved one is taken away. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Try to make peace. Be involved. You will be persecuted. All of these things are more complex than we tend to think they are, because we just somehow have gotten it into our head that heaven is a place where angels play harps and float on clouds, and that the only way really to get there, and the whole reason Christ came to earth, was to tell us to be nice and mind our business, which is as far from the truth as can be. And you'll see that if you read the Bible. Now, I realize that Romans is difficult. I realize that I didn't talk much about the Tower of Babel. I realize that there's a lot in this class, but I'm taking you through it, reading by reading, day by day. Watch these videos every day, students. I'm only asking you to read Scripture Monday through Friday. You should read it every day, in depth, various parts of it. Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. St. Jerome said that, and today is his feast day. I mentioned him in class. I didn't think today was his feast day, but it is. Read this stuff. You will find out that you might not know who Jesus is, but he's there in that book, and he will astonish you.